بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه وتبع هداه ثم أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. My dearly respected brothers and sisters, welcome to this joint program hosted by Guidance College and ICNA. It is a pleasure and honor to be here today. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak about a very important topic. And before we begin, it is a pleasure and honor for me to introduce esteemed Sheikh and scholar Dr. Hatem Al-Hajj, who is a scholar of Islamic law and jurisprudence and is also a medical doctor here in the United States. He is a mufti with part of the permanent Fatwa Council, and he is also the College of Islamic Studies in English with Mishkah University, as well as of many other organizations. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikhna.
Wa alaikum assalam wa barakatuh. Allah barak feekum, Shafa.
Thank you so much for taking time to come and be with us today and to benefit us. I know how busy you are, so it's really an honor and pleasure, and we're really grateful and greatly appreciate it. Jazakumullah khairan.
Allah barak feekum, ahsan alaykum.
Sheikhna, inshallah, today the topic is the ruling on taking vaccines in general, and specifically we're going to focus on the COVID-19 vaccines. And this topic has become relevant again, even though it was an old issue that we were discussing, and we even gave a fatwa with AMJA about a year ago. But it's become relevant again with the spread of the new variant, the Delta variant, and with some countries now entering into new waves of COVID. And so people are asking in other parts of the world about this issue, even though this issue was discussed in other parts of the world who already had their first and second wave. So it was incumbent upon us to bring this up again and clarify to the people, as there is much confusion on social media, and many people are speaking about this issue, and this is an issue that requires depth in Islamic law as well as in medicine. And there are many subtopics that can be discussed, speaking about the permissibility of vaccines, as you know, Sheikhna, and as you have taught us. And precision in these matters and correct conceptualization is key to getting the ruling right. And some of these subtopics, inshallah, we hope to touch upon and benefit from you regarding is, number one, the default ruling with regards to medical treatment, so seeking medical treatment in general. Number two, the ruling on eating and drinking haram substances due to necessity. Number three, the ruling on seeking treatment with impermissible and impure substances when there's no other halal alternative. Number four, the ruling on taking something that has some harm for a greater benefit and repelling a greater harm. Number five, the use of human cells or human body parts or benefiting from human beings, whether dead or alive, in research, development, medicine, and so on. Number six, the ruling on forcing someone to take medicine against their will. All of these issues were discussed in great detail in the books of fiqh, and each one of these sub-issues has further sub-issues that maybe inshallah we'll touch upon as we guide our discussion. And we'll be using the AMJA fatwa that we came up with about a year ago. This was posted on the AMJA website. You can find it here, amjaonline.org. The ruling on getting the COVID-19 coronavirus vaccine, posted in December of 2020. And this fatwa was written by our Sheikh Dr. Hatem Al-Hajj, and it was approved by the AMJA adopted. And this fatwa, subhanAllah, was met actually saw it being countries around the world by different councils and Islamic institutions, and it's been used as kind of the standard for the fatwa in the Western world regarding the ruling on taking the coronavirus vaccine. So inshallah, we'll just get right to it since we don't have much time and there are a lot of topics to discuss. Discussing the issue of the default ruling of medical treatment. The scholars differed, Sheikhna, as you know, taught us. Some of them said it was permissible. Some said it was permissible, but it's better to leave it off. It was recommended. Some even said it was obligatory. And some people today are asking, why are we not saying it's obligatory to take the COVID-19 vaccine? Some people actually demanding from the scholars to give this opinion. And so the issue is also related to the next issue, which is not just the ruling on seeking medical treatment in general, but the ruling on eating and drinking haram substances due to necessity. And even this, as you know, Sheikhna, is an issue that is differed upon. Some obligated it, and those who obligated it, they gave the reason that it is certain by eating, carrion and the like, that you will save your life. Whereas when it came to medical treatment, it's not certain that it'll be a benefit or it will save you. And those who allowed it, we find even the consensus was cited on allowing it, but differing over that level, obligatory or not. Some said it was obligatory. Again, some said it was recommended. Some even said it was only permissible. And those who spoke about why it was allowed, they said there's a greater maslahah. And this is related to point number 1 here in the fatwa, that the preservation of life is of the greatest objectives of the Sharia, or is of the highest objectives of Sharia. For it, Allah has permitted for someone who's compelled the consumptions and even the utterance of words of disbelief. So we find some of the fuqaha, when talking about why it's allowed by consensus as permissible, they said the maslahah of saving a life is greater than the maslahah of keeping people away from haram and impure substances. So Sheikhna, based on this issue of ruling of medical treatment, and then the ruling of eating and drinking impure or impermissible substances due to, and some of the scholars saying that the difference between the two is that we'll obligate it here because it's certain that it will benefit and save you, whereas when it comes to regular, the default ruling, it's not certain, so we're not going to obligate it here. What position should we take in the modern period, especially with the development of modern science? And does this affect the fatwa moving forward on these issues?
Yes, alhamdulillah, as you already pointed out, the issue of the ruling of seeking medical treatment is a controversial issue. But we have the general trend, or the dominant trend within the tradition, is basically the preference, recommendation, istihbab. So seeking medical treatment is encouraged. It's not obligatory, and that's pretty much the dominant trend in the tradition. In the four mazahib, the dominant trend is istihbab, which is basically being preferred, recommended. And we know that Imam Ahmed, for instance, said that it is suboptimal for people who have a complete tawakkul or reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Certainly, no one disliked it or prohibited it, but the majority of Muslim scholars just recommended it. And then some of the Muslim scholars, particularly in the Shafi'i and Hanbali madhab, also considered it obligatory to some extent. And the reason why the majority did not consider it obligatory is that medical treatment in their times was based on conjecture more than certainty or preponderance even. A lot of treatments were not particularly that effective. But if you bring a scholar who, like Imam Taymiyyah rahimahullah, one of the most brilliant people in our intellectual history, he also points out that medical treatment is not based on certainty. It's not like eating for someone who's starving. If you give them food, you will be certain that they will benefit from that. Or if you give them water, it is certain that they benefit from that. So if you give them something that is haram, like let's say pork, then it is certain that that it can save their life. Whereas medical treatment was not based on certainty. This is completely valid in their times. But if you say to our scholars of the past who considered treatment not obligatory, what about giving insulin to a diabetic patient? Like if you have a diabetic patient and prior to the discovery of insulin, they used to die within a few months from the diagnosis. It was just like a fatal disease. And we're talking about type 1 diabetes here. So if prior to insulin or, so what do you think of insulin for a diabetic patient? Is it recommended or obligatory for a diabetic patient to take insulin, knowing that if he does not take it, he will suffer from extreme complications, ending in death? In this case, we would say that in our times, and most of the scholars of the past would have concurred had they seen the advances in the medical sciences and the medical industry in general, we would say that seeking treatment is obligatory in cases where the medicine is safe and the disease is harmful. So the medicine is safe and effective and the disease is harmful. So basically, if you have a little runny nose, it's not obligatory for you to take medicine because most of the people can recover from a common cold without medicine. But if you have diabetes and then the doctors tell you insulin is safe and effective, then it is mandatory to take it because the Prophet ﷺ said, "La darar wa la dirar." There should be no harm or reciprocation of harm. And certainly, if you don't take the medicine, you will be harming yourself. So that's in a nutshell the sort of the dominant position in the tradition and why this changes in the circumstantial variables and in the developments in the medical industry should have an impact on our choices, modern choices nowadays.
Jazakumullah khairan, Sheikhna. And as you know, Sheikhna, on this issue of eating or drinking something impermissible or impure due to necessity, subtopics they discussed, are there any exceptions to this rule, even in a state of necessity, and they differed over that. And they even discussed what is the state of necessity, and that's actually the next topic I would like to open, inshallah, up for discussion. We find that when discussing the issue of the state of necessity, some said that this was specific to perishing. But then we find other scholars also including with that in the ruling someone who fears a terminal illness or fears that they will be too weak to walk or ride, so that they'll be cut off from their traveling group and then thus they will perish. And some were even more flexible than that and easier. So when it comes to necessity, sometimes some people will say that using impure substances, then if we're only going to allow it for necessity and take the ruling of a necessity, then this would only be the case if someone who's already infected with the disease and is in a terminal illness. Now we're talking about prevention with vaccines. So here, when it comes to vaccine, you're taking something in hope of preventing something from afflicting you that has not yet afflicted and you don't know yet if this will affect you. And here we find in the fatwa it talks about the different upon maxim, which is that which is likely treated like that which is certain, and that which is close something, it takes its ruling, and so on and so forth. There's various wordings of related maxims that are related to this principle, and even some of the books of legal maxims, as you know, Sheikhna, they even the sigha, the wording of it is in a question form, and some of the books of legal maxims. Does the thing that is eminent, is it like treated like that which has already occurred, and so on, because it is a matter that is differed upon, and we find amongst the fuqaha that they treat this maxim differently in applying rulings. So here, if we even agree that khalas, that due to necessity or even due to the effectiveness of medical treatment, if someone is sick, then yes, they can use medicines, and it's even obligatory for them to use medicines, and they can even use medicines that are comprised of impure substances. So in this case, they are not yet ill. They are not yet ill. So here, what would be your response or your fiqhi conceptualization of this situation, and how does this apply to what we just mentioned?
Okay. Certainly, these issues would be controversial, and we have to be honest about these things. As you alluded, these things are controversial. This particular maxim, which is al-mutawaqqa kal-waqa, that which is imminent, about to happen, is like that which is present, is a maxim that has been reported in the books of fiqh with a question mark. So it's a controversial issue. So some of the scholars would treat that which is imminent like that which is present, and some scholars would not. And if you look through the tradition, you will find that in application, they also treated these things like that. So al-mutawaqqa kal-waqa, if you fear that if you don't eat that you will not find more, can you carry with you, or can you eat until because you are afraid that you will miss your company, for instance. So if you miss your company, that will put you in harm's way. But it is not certain, it is likely, and it is not present, it is imminent. Also, if you fear that you may not find more, if you like are in a desert and you may not find more food, can you eat more of the haram food? So these are different applications of these principles. So that which is likely is treated like that which is certain, that which is imminent is treated like that which is present. We have chosen, Amja has chosen to support the position of, that which is likely is treated like that which is certain. That's the dominant position in the tradition. The dominant غلبة الظن تنزل منزلة اليقين أو تعامل معاملة اليقين. So the dominant position in the tradition is that which is likely is like that which is certain. Most things in this world are not certain. So we can't treat the 98% like we treat the 50%, the 90, or like that we treat the 30%. The 98% is treated like the 100%. That which is likely should take the ruling of that which is certain. But the other one is a little bit more controversial. That which is imminent is like that which is present. That's a little bit controversial, and that it is Amja's choice to treat that which is imminent like that which is present. And I believe wholeheartedly in this position. And without this position, we can't plan ahead. Without this position, we will harm our ability to repel harm, to repel imminent harm, and that can be quite devastating to us. It is important, though, to mention, because people would get confused a little bit now. We're talking about impure substances, and people will think that all the vaccines are impure, which is not true. The mRNA vaccines, they're not developed in fetal cells, or they don't have these issues. The mRNA vaccines are the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines. These are not developed in fetal cells. The question is about the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson vaccines when it comes to the fetal cells. But these other ones, the Pfizer and the Moderna ones, are not developed in fetal cells. So the issue of impurity, or the issue of the ethical issues of basically growing vaccines in fetal cells are not pertinent to Pfizer and Moderna. Yeah.
Now, Sheikh, yes, and inshallah we'll get to the point of the issue of which vaccines have impure substances and the rulings on related to impurities. But still talking about just the general concept of necessity and imminent harm. SubhanAllah, even applying this maxim, even when it comes to the issue of the state of necessity, some of the fuqaha, they mentioned that even here, certainty is not needed that you are going to die or be in a state of necessity, but even just dhann is sufficient that if I eat this, then this is sufficient for me, that it'll remove the harm and get me out of the state or protect me from the state. And even in other chapters of fiqh, in the books of fiqh, as you know, Sheikhna, they have, the section on the rulings of the one who's in a state of necessity that talks about this. Can a person eat from the carrion, until they are full, or even more than they are full, and can they carry with them, as you pointed out. But I also, subhanAllah, thinking about fiqh in other chapters as well, that I think there are issues that could help us here, and I wanted to maybe get your thoughts on this. So, for example, when they're talking about the person gifting on their deathbed, talking about, how are we going to treat this? Are we going to treat it like a bequest or not? From the 1/3 and so on. When they're talking about someone who is in a fearful disease, fearing death, a terminal illness on his deathbed, and they gift, they're talking about what ruling are we going to give to this, gifting. From the things they talked about is what scenarios would also be included with, the state of being in a fearful illness. And from the things they talked about, some of the fuqaha, they mentioned that if the plague enters into the country that you are in, and this, reminded me of this situation. They talked about if the plague enters into a country that you're in, even though you are not sick yet, but it's present in your country, in your area, then they would treat this as if, similar to the maxim, that which is imminent is treated like that which is present. They'll say that the person gifting in this state will be treated as if he is on his deathbed or with a fearful terminal, illness. Similarly, some of the fuqaha, when they were talking about this issue, they said, what we're talking about a fearful illness isn't that most likely you're going to die from that situation, or even it's 50-50. And the proof for that, as some fuqaha mentioned, is that because the fuqaha mentioned that a woman giving birth also in this state, her gifting would be treated like that, like, the person in a fearful illness. So there is some leniency here with this, that if there's a fear of death, even if it's not present at the moment, or even if it's not, in some cases like giving birth, extremely likely, some fuqaha did, apply this and they give a license to this. So would these rulings as well and in these other chapters of fiqh play a role in making this decision?
Yes, as you know, the legal maxims basically are patterns that are discovered by sort of comprehensive reading of the furu' or the detailed rulings of fiqh. So the fuqaha look at the detailed rulings and they try to find patterns, and then they formulate those legal maxims from those patterns. And certainly, this treating that which is eminent like that which is certain, there are many examples throughout the sort of the corpus of the law that support treating that which is eminent like that which is present. And it is also important nowadays, because particularly when it comes to medicine, because preventative medicine has a huge role in sort of human well-being.
Allah barak fikum, Sheikhna. So inshallah, moving on, Sheikhna, to the next important point when giving this fatwa is the point here mentioned, using a forbidden substance other than pure alcoholic beverage as medicine is permissible according to the majority if it is the sole effective treatment. The vast majority of contemporary scholars adopt this position because of the clear benefits in modern medicines that approach certainty at times. So subhanAllah, Sheikhna, this issue now leads us to a level that is less, than the state of necessity we were talking about. Even in the state of necessity, as we mentioned when they were discussing, does this, ruling apply to whether you are traveling only or also if you're a resident? And they spoke about, are there exceptions? So some even mentioned exceptions to what you can eat or drink, even in a state of necessity. Here in this level as well, when it comes to seeking treatment with impure and permissible substances when there isn't an alternative, here also there's difference of opinion and also differed over the exceptions to the thing. So here some as you know, Sheikhna, some allowed it, some didn't allow it. Some allowed it if it is known that this impermissible substance will be a cure, and then they differed over the exceptions, just like in the previous case. And alcohol is a famous example, as is mentioned in this. As is mentioned, but there's also other impure substances and other substances that they differed over, whether these are exceptions to the permissibility or not. So, Sheikhna, here the fatwa of Amja is they allow all types of impure and impermissible substances except for alcohol in these types of situations?
Yes, and even alcohol, the very vast majority, they forbid the use of pure alcohol, but certainly when a little bit of that is mixed with some other medicine, then that would be a different discussion. But aside from the issue of alcohol, impermissible substances, well, where does impermissibility come from anyway? So impermissibility would come from uh, just explicit prohibition of the Prophet ﷺ, such as frogs. Don't kill the frogs, for instance. Or it comes from three other causes that would cause something to be impermissible. One of them is basically intoxication. The other one is impurity. The third one, you could divide the third one into two. You could say harm and basically mustakhbath, which is disgusting, or things that are disgusting. And some people say disgusting things are forbidden because they're usually harmful. But anyway, you could divide that into two. So these are impermissible things, are either impermissible because of intoxication, because of impurity, because of harm, because they are disgusting. So when it comes to intoxication, we said that this has a special ruling, and Islam is particularly strict with intoxicants. But when it comes to things that are impermissible for other than intoxication, then we have some disagreement between the fuqaha. And as you know, most of this disagreement is based on their understanding of the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ allowed people to drink the urine of camels for treatment. So the Hanafis and the Shafi'is consider the urine of camels to be impure. So they said, well, here the Prophet ﷺ is allowing them to use an impure substance for treatment. Therefore, the Hanafis and Shafi'is tend to be generally more flexible, more permissive when it comes to the use of impermissible substances for treatment. The Malikis and Hanbalis, on the other hand, they said that the urine of camels and the urine of that which is edible, or animals whose meat is edible, is not actually impure. So the Malikis and Hanbalis tend to be a little bit more on the restrictive side in terms of using haram substances for medical treatment. Within each madhab, there is a lot of there are a lot of nuances and discussions and sometimes controversies within each madhab. But Amjad had chosen, and the vast majority of contemporary Muslim scholars have chosen the more lenient position when it comes to the use of impure substances for treatment, and allowed their use. That's the vast majority of contemporary scholars, and that's the position of Amjad as well. And the basis of this is the fact that many treatments can be called impure, or they can have like impure origin or extracted from impure substances, and these are effective treatments. So the Hanafis add this caveat, which is that the treatment has to be known to be effective, to be permissible. So that's the position of the vast majority of contemporary scholars, and it is the position that's adopted by Amjad and other fiqh councils as well, and including the International Islamic Fiqh Academy, IIFA.
Jazakumullah khair, Shaykh. And subhanAllah, we also find with some of the fuqaha, when we were discussing the previous issue of whether it's obligatory or not to eat, from carrion and the like in a state of necessity to save yourself, and those who are obligated, again, they mentioned the maslaha of preservation of life, and they also mentioned that, leaving yourself until you die is a form of, destroying yourself and so on. When discussing this issue here, they said the reason, when discussing is it allowed or not to use impermissible or treatment that has impermissible substances or impure substances, they said the difference between here and the previous situation is that eating certainly will save you, but here again, it's not certain that this treatment with impurities or impermissible substance will cure you. So again, it seems like many of the differences on these rulings, again, based on this concept, this theme that keeps recurring, certainty in terms of treatment as opposed to eating, carrion and the like. So it seems like, again, the positions of Amjad that we are choosing is also based on the updated medical research and the new knowledge that we have in terms of the effectiveness of these treatments.
Yeah,
and
like
related to
when Sheikh Ahmed, when you have a person that is suffering from a serious infection, like if there are doctors here, they know like a bug called MRSA, that's methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, and you put the bug on a culture, and you add different antibiotics to the culture, and you see that vancomycin kills it. And you tell the doctor that this bug is sensitive to vancomycin. Now, how could this level of certainty be disregarded? When you say that this person has type 1 diabetes, and if you don't take your insulin, we do see your sugar coming up from 90 to 150 to 200, and you get to 300 to 400, and you get into diabetic ketoacidosis, and then you get into shock, you die. And then the doctor knows that if I give this person an insulin, the sugar will start to come down. How could this level of certainty be disregarded? This is just absolutely nothing. Anyone who understands Islam and knows how Islam values life and the well-being of people will certainly concur that in such cases that level of certainty is considerable. And even if it is not certain, what is certain in this life? Like if you are starving, dying, and you find a carrion, or you find pork, or you find like a dead pig, is it certain that eating will save your life? No, it's not. Are you talking about 100%? No, there is no 100% there, even in that. So, it is enough to be extremely likely. It is enough to be preponderant, to be likely, to be probable, so that it will be legally consequential. And it is the Shafi'is and Hanbalis have even allowed, which is related to this topic, have even allowed, like if you find like a person that is dead and you are dying, the Hanafis and Malikis gave precedence to the concept of hurma here, hurmat al-adami, and the Shafi'is and Hanbalis, they gave precedence to the concept of the preservation of life. The precedence is to be given to life, to preservation of life, and that is also clearly. And I may be affected by the intellectual milieu that I'm surrounded by, or my living here, I guess, or something. But it is quite clear to me that precedence should be given to preservation of life, and it is quite clear to me that the preservation of life is the highest objective in Islam. Certainly people can talk about the preservation of deen versus the preservation of life, but at the end of the day, if you're dying, you could do things that are haram to preserve your life, and that will not compromise your deen.
Allah barak fik, Shaykhna. Now, inshallah, we were going to get to the issue of using human cells for development and the discussion of even, state of necessity, eating human. And as you mentioned, Shaykhna, scholars, they differed on this issue, and even those who allowed it, they differentiate between different types of people. We don't need to get into it now, but inshallah, we'll get back to this issue when we talk about the consumption of maybe human cells, if that is indeed a question people are asking, if, since some of the vaccines are being made in cells, whether it's swine cells or human cells. We'll get to this issue if it is the case that some human cells are being consumed. Which position can we take on this issue? But I just want to make sure we get through all these points. So you mentioned, Sheikhna, the issue of certainty and dhann, and subhanAllah, even some of the fuqaha were saying the same thing that you had mentioned, Sheikhna, that if some of them they're quoted as saying, like, if the treatment is certain or known to be effective, then in this case we would say it's obligatory to seek it. So we have this precedent, and were these scholars that mentioned these opinions previously. So it goes to this position here that the basis of judgment in the matters of medicine is probability, not certainty. And we actually mentioned this already. We talked about some of the fuqaha said that dhann is sufficient even when it comes to carrying due to necessity, and certainty isn't required, it's not a condition. Some of them mentioned dhann is sufficient. And we mentioned some of the examples of probability of leading to, states of necessity, not necessarily being in that state right now, but scenarios that would lead to that, and how the fuqaha allowed and gave leniency to those scenarios. So we mentioned this one. What is likely treated as like certain, we talked about it. Using forbidden substance, we talked about this. Conflicting harms and benefit, we mentioned this, that some of the ta'leel, some of the reasoning that the fuqaha mentioned for allowing some cases is the maslaha of saving life is greater than the maslaha of keeping people away from haram and impure substances. Now, Sheikhna, let's move on to actually relate to this point. I remembered something, the issue of maslaha and benefits and harms. Some people are asking, Sheikhna, okay, we agree with you in terms of medicine by giving you something beneficial and helpful to cure something that which is harmful. But here we are injecting you with, and of course you're gonna, Sheikhna, I'm sure you'll enlighten us about some of the different types of vaccines, whether it's the different styles, whether we're actually using the virus to inject or mRNA technology or system. But some people say, well, if we're injecting with some of the injections, they inject a small dose of the disease itself into you. So this would differ with the ruling, even if we agree that, okay, it would be obligatory to seek treatment. That is when using something beneficial to cure something that's harmful. Here you're injecting yourself with something harmful. And this issue is related to this maxim of, giving precedence over benefits and harms. Actually, some of the fuqaha I recall mentioned that after they mentioned the ruling of it's haram to use poisons as medicine, some of them mentioned, but if there's a medication that is mixed with poison, and it is most likely hoped that the harm from taking that medicine with poison is going to be less than the greater benefit of trying to get rid of that illness, then it would be allowed to take that medicine, even though it has some poison and there could be some harm. And this, it would be allowed because, inshallah, the greater benefit of removing the illness is more likely in this scenario. So this reminded me of this maxim and this issue related to, to taking a vaccine that has a portion of, or a small percentage of the virus being injected into your body. This also may be, Sheikh, and again, I'm just speaking out loud here, this may be also a response to those who say that there's some risks in taking the vaccine. Supposedly, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Sheikh, some of these vaccines were reported to cause either blood clots or some sort of illnesses. And so again, this would be, and correct me, Sheikh, if you think differently, that this would be the same response, that even again, if taking poison in medicine, if the greater harm is repelled, even if there's some minor harm, then this would be the response to that. Do you have any comments on this, or agree or disagree, or any other examples that we could use fiqhiyan to do takhrij on this issue?
As Imam Taymiyyah rahimahullah said something that's quite brilliant. He said that it is not really that difficult or that smart to sort out harmful from beneficial. The wisdom is in sorting out the greater of the two harms and the greater of the two benefits, so that you ward off the greater harm by tolerating the lesser harm, and you procure the greater benefit by forsaking the lesser benefit. That's where wisdom and intelligence comes. It's not basically just to sort out harm from benefit, because most people can do this, but you need experts to sort out the greater of the two harms and the greater of the two benefits. Now, when it comes to this issue, we should defer to the experts. I usually say to people when they come and ask me, because they think, since I'm a pediatrician and we give vaccines to children and stuff like this, they think I'm a vaccinologist or something. I'm not. I also defer to the experts. So the people who do those studies, the people who spend their lives studying those matters, we should defer to them. And in this case, the very vast majority of experts, like, uh, it may even be safe to say that the sort of the counter voices are shaz voices, voices, eccentric voices, because the mainstream voices within the medical profession, within the sort of the scholarly community in the medical profession, is that the benefit of those vaccines outweighs the harm. And in this case, I don't promise you anything. I don't tell you that I'm certain. I don't tell you that I did those studies. I'm just telling you that it seems that 99.9% of the experts are telling us that the benefit of the vaccine outweighs the harm. And I'm quite sure that on your WhatsApp group or on Facebook, you've seen a doctor who says otherwise. But that's really not sufficient. Just investigate the matter a little bit more. What is the background of this doctor? It's not any doctor. Doctors are not really experts in everything related to medicine or related to biological sciences. Most of the doctors are clinicians. They're not really doing studies or anything. They're just consuming the studies. Maybe they're a little bit more capable than the public in reading a medical study or something, but they're consumers also of this knowledge. They're not basically the ones who come up with it. So anyway, we're just deferring to the experts. The experts in this case said that the benefits of these vaccines for the individual, from an individual perspective and from a public health perspective, outweigh the harms. And certainly from a public health perspective, that's even more obvious, that the benefit outweighs the harm.
Now, and that actually leads us to the next section here, which is concerning the particular issue of the COVID-19. It is a matter of great importance that goes beyond the interests of individuals to communal ones. And then the fatwa talks about the issue of herd immunity and needing to reach at least 70% according to some medical opinions and so on. And this can either be achieved through the vaccine or through people getting infected and the virus spreading through the people. This actually leads to another fiqhi discussion that, again, I'm just speaking aloud how maybe some objections that could come our way would be, we agree and we submit to everything you mentioned before about, necessity and them being treated like certainty and so on, and obligating even treatment. We even agree with that. But someone might say that is with regards to the state of necessity or illness at an individual level. But when it comes to COVID-19, most people, they will get ill, but they won't die from it. They won't reach a state of necessity. And only the people who are either elderly or have certain diseases, underlying diseases, that would actually put them in that state of necessity. And so they said that you are guys, the mashayikh are maybe giving a general blanket fatwa, treating a state of necessity for some people like it's a state of necessity for everyone, and that's not the case. And again, this is all theoretical discussion, assuming that the vaccine you're taking does have impurities, and as you mentioned, Sheikhna, that's not the case. But this, again, just a general academic discussion to cover all the bases. Assuming the only one, for example, that available in a country is the one, and this may be the case in some countries, is one that has impurities in it. And we talked about the ruling of necessity and when it's allowed, or if not, to use these type of medications. They will say this only applies to individuals that are actually in a state of necessity. Even if we take the maxim, that which is imminent is like that which is certain, that only applies for those who are elderly and the like, not for the most of the population. I was thinking maybe a way to respond to this, and again, correct me, Sheikhna, if you disagree, that the issue of eating, the fuqaha talked about, doing something that is impermissible or leaving off something which is, obligatory, for the benefit of someone else, this could also be applied here. So, for example, they mentioned, the ruling on breaking your prayer to save someone who is drowning or is burning, or breaking your fast to have strength to save someone in that state of necessity, and so on. And the takhrij of this would be, in my opinion, that eating carrion as well, if you needed that to be strong enough to save someone also in a state of necessity, then that would also be something that you would do. And as such, us taking those who are not in a state of necessity, um, uh, taking the medication that has impurities or impermissible matters to be able to protect those who certainly will die, or at least get very close to dying or certainly at least will be in a state of necessity, fearing dying, like the elderly and the like, to save those, because we could also transmit the disease and we need this 70% herd immunity. This would also be a takhrij in the modern age on those issues. Again, I'm thinking out loud here from a fiqh perspective. Would you agree with the Sheikhna, or do you have another perspective on how to respond to this issue of the ruling you guys are talking about, the Mashaykh are talking about, is related to only the elderly, but you can't give that ruling to the mass population who are not in high risk of this?
Yeah, I agree. I just need to add a few things. I just wanted to say, I agree with that rationale, and certainly, like, as you know, in the Hanbali method, for instance, you're obliged to defend the sort of the life and the honor of people if you can do this. But when it comes to their property, you should not be defending their property if that would result in harm to yourself or to the basically the offender. But when it comes to defending people's life and people's honor, you would take that risk. You would take that risk. And here we're not talking about property. We're not talking about protecting money or property. We're talking about protecting the lives of people. And so it is completely consistent with the way I understand Islam, that preservation of life is preservation of your life and the lives of others, and that exceptions will be made for the preservation of your life and the lives of others. That's the first thing. But the second thing is that this notion that COVID is really not a serious disease, except for the elderly or people who have pre-existing conditions, it is largely true in the sense that it is more serious for those people, but it does not mean that it is really a safe disease. It is just almost defiance of the sun in the middle of a summer day, defiance of the existence of the sun in the middle of a summer day, to say that this is not serious except for elderly people. How many? I don't know. Some people may be living in bubbles, but I have known people who are of my mashayikh and the other students of knowledge and other ulama from different parts of the world that have died, and they did not have pre-existing condition, and they were not elderly. Some people may not know that many people anyway. So within their limited circles, they have not seen somebody, but we have seen many. I contracted this virus early on because I work in the medical field. I contracted it early on. I survived, but I developed some complications. So it is, those people who think that it's just, like a flu. It's not like a flu. Flu also kills people, by the way. But at the end of the day, it's a bit more serious than that. So that's the other thing that I wanted to say. And the third thing that I wanted to say is that going back to and maybe you want to discuss this now or you want to discuss this later, but going back to the vaccines, you said that these vaccines, if we have the impure vaccines in a particular country, this is not going to be based only on the permissibility of pure substances for the necessity of repelling harm. Because we are not conceding to this being impure to begin with. I am not conceding. It will be a controversial issue. but I'm not conceding to the impurity of those vaccines. I'm not conceding to the impermissibility of those vaccines for several reasons. One of those reasons is what's the problem with the vaccines? Sheikh Ahmed, Dr. Ahmed, you tell me, what's the problem with the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson?
So the issue here, and we're going to get to it, Sheikhna, in the next paragraph about the issue of the virus being grown in a cell line. Before getting to that, Sheikhna, if you'll permit me, I actually had an addition. You had mentioned that you developed complications, and even someone who is not in a high risk for dying from the disease, but even a healthy person, like you mentioned, could develop serious complications. When we were mentioning about the issue of defining what is the state of necessity for being able to eat carrion and the like, and some of them said, it's fearing, that you will perish. But we also mentioned that some of them were more flexible and said, if you fear you won't be able to walk and get to your ride, etc. Some of them even mentioned just fearing disease, خوف المرض, they just kept it even more flexible. So that even may give us some leeway with that position, that even this disease, even if you are probably not going to die from it, there's still a chance that you could, there is a legitimate fear of you being able to, or being afflicted with some serious complications. And so maybe even that could play a role in allowing this based on the fatwa. So there was some leeway in this tradition. It's not just necessarily that being in a state of necessity means you must, either you're going to die or not. There are other opinions that existed, and correct me, Sheikh, if you disagree, if we're allowed to take those positions or not. But there are other positions, even in the different madhabs they mentioned, that fear of this, fear of that, and some of them, like I said, just fear of disease. So there is precedent, I believe, and hopefully you agree with me, Sheikhna, for giving flexibility on this issue. So to answer your question, Sheikhna, now what is the problem with this vaccine? And this leads us to the next section in the fatwa. And
if you look at the Hanbali madhab and the sort of, when they talk about disease and when they talk about breaking your fasting or they talk about combining the prayers for disease, when they mention examples of the diseases that would allow this, you'll find them to be considerate of just disease in general, and some of the examples are particularly light.
Sahih, Sheikhna, Allah yabarak fikum. So here, Sheikhna, now in the fatwa, the second part of the fatwa answers the question that you were asking. So some people may say the problem with the disease is number one, the problem of production, and so here, about which some have said that it might be done through cultivating the viruses in fetal or porcine cells or producing their proteins therefrom. Here is the answer to this reservation. So here we have two main reservations that could be problematic. One is the issue of impurity, like we talked about. And you mentioned, Sheikhna, that you don't even think that would be impure. And so maybe we can talk about this issue of which positions Amjad takes in terms of which impurities and what amount of impurities are overlooked, and the difference of opinion amongst the scholars and which opinion we took when it comes to the effect upon water, liquids, and foods, and the issue of istihada and istihlak, chemical changes and it disappearing, or traces disappearing when being mixed with a substance, and that effect when it comes to impurities. So that's one issue. And then the issue is the usage of human cells. So the benefiting from human body parts and consuming it, maybe if that's something that could happen by taking the vaccine, and the issue of other impurities, like specifically the impurity of swine. So here, Sheikhna, maybe we can start off with the first question, the issue of impurity. Maybe you could give us a background instead of me reading all of this, how these vaccines are made and which one of those would possibly have traces of swine impurity in them, and then the response to that by saying we take this position or that position when it comes to which impurities and how much of those impurities are overlooked, especially when it comes to mixing with water, liquids, and food.
I'm not familiar with vaccines that are using swine. Maybe someone is familiar. I'm not familiar. I think it is the fetal cells that are being used by Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, but maybe AstraZeneca are using swine. Anyway, so it has to be one of two things. It's, if they're using swine, then it's the issue of impurity. If they're using if there's the issue of the hurma or sacredness of the human body. So let's take the issue of impurity. And the issue of impurity, if swine is being used, the impurity here is true. I mean, if the swine, everything in the swine is impure, so the fetal cells are impure, but this is impurity by al-mujawara. Najasa bil-mujawara, هي ضعيفة خفيفة. So it is impurity by proximity, not impurity in and of itself, because the virus is being cultured or cultivated in the swine cells. The virus itself is not impure, but it is existing in a container that is pure. It's being cultivated inside the swine cells, which are impure. So this is impurity by proximity. We're talking about cells here, so we have that concept of trivial amounts are exempt. So in addition to being impure by proximity, which is light impurity, there is also the yasir ma fi anhu, which means trivial things are exempt. And then you add the two to the fact that, you know, even impure substances are allowed for treatment or for medical uses, then the issue will be even lighter. But if we're talking about the sacredness of the human body, and that's the, you know, if it is fetal cells, if the virus is cultivated in fetal cells, then we're talking about the sacredness of the human body. The vast majority, let us say the clear majority of Muslim scholars, allow organ transplantation. So they allow the use of parts of the human body for medical purposes. Certainly the human body is sacred. Certainly the mutilation of the human body for no good purpose or for a bad purpose would be an enormous crime. However, we are talking about saving lives here, and we are talking about medical benefit, and we're talking about parts of the human body that are being used, you know, with consent of the person or consent of the guardians. In the case of fetal cells, it's consent of the parents. The parents consented. Fetal cells come from lines of fetal cells from the 1970s. Parents consented. We don't know if this abortion was haram or not. Could have been a spontaneous abortion. It could have been a warranted abortion, because there are some cases where abortion is permissible, you know. But anyway, certain cases of abortion or something, fetal cells have been taken by consent from the parents and used, and they have been basically cultured, and then you have like so many lines of those fetal cells that were taken from the 1970s. Now you can cultivate the virus inside those fetal cells. So it goes back to sacredness of the human body. And as I said before, the Hanafi, the Hanbalis, and the Shafi'is, they are more lenient in this regard. And that's why you find them, and majority of scholars that come from those traditions, more lenient with organ transplantation. But even the Hanafis and the Malikis scholars, Hanafi and Maliki scholars, due to the obvious benefit of organ transplantation and the obvious benefit of transfusion, blood transfusion, organ transplantation, and all of these things, they have basically large numbers of them have allowed organ transplantation. And here it is just like that. If you allow organ transplantation, although it is violation of the sacredness of the human body from cadavers or from living persons, then you should allow the use of fetal cells of aborted fetuses by, could have been halal abortion by the consent of their parents to grow the virus.
Allah yabarak fikum, Sheikhna. And also, Sheikhna, if you allow me, aside also from the issue of the discussion on can someone in a state of necessity eat from a human being or not, there are also other fiqh issues that I think could help us in doing takhrij of this issue. So you had mentioned, for example, giving permission to use these cells, after death or whatever. The fuqaha talked about what if someone in their will, they wrote in their will that their limbs should be cut off. Similarly, the scholars discussed the issue of cutting open the stomach of a dead person to get out a fetus or to get money from in there. They discussed the issue of benefiting from the use of human parts, and they talked about mending a broken bone with impurities and returning a fallen tooth back to its place, or using another tooth from a dead person or from an animal, whether it's whether it was slaughtered or not, whether it's carrion. So there are other issues that are differed upon that could definitely be precedent. And let me know if you agree, Sheikh, or disagree, that could be used for the possibility of using the cells in a very important situation that would save lives, like in this case.
Yeah, the idea of not violating or mutilating the human body has had several exceptions, and the precedents in the fiqh are quite obvious and quite clear. I mean, if you swallow something, and particularly if it is not yours and you die, like we can take it out. If there is a living fetus inside the body of a dead woman, they have also, all these things are controversial. However, many scholars did allow, this sort of quote unquote violation of the sacredness of the human body for a greater benefit. And in this case, it would not be violation of the sacredness. Violation of the sacredness would be in case you're doing it for fun, in case you're doing it for just to inflict harm, psychological harm or other harm on the person or their family members or their tribe or anyone.
So we're actually over our time, I believe, but there's still one important issue, inshallah, we can end with, and that is the issue of forcing someone to take medicine. So the fuqaha, they talked about this issue, and some of them said that it's not allowed to force someone to take medicine against their will. Others said it would be allowed if you know that them not taking it will lead to them perishing. So this goes back to the issue of obligating the COVID-19 vaccine. And why is from this fatwa, it seems that it's a suggestion to go back to your medical doctors, and it allows it. The fatwa stops short at obligating it. And actually, if you recall, Sheikhna, we just received another fatwa question with Amjad that we haven't published yet, and the fatwa response that was given that we were discussing a few days ago was that we cannot say that it's obligatory upon everyone around the world to take it, but we can say that in a locality, it's obligatory to follow the what is mandated by the rulers and the people of of responsibility and those in charge. And from those are the scholars. And so if your fiqh council or your scholars in the area say you should take it. So it still seemed stopping a little bit short of obligating. So number one, does this go back to, again, the issue that we talked about in the beginning of the ruling of seeking treatment in the first place? And number two, the issue that the fuqaha mentioned about forcing someone to take medication, and if so, how did that lead us to stopping short at saying that it is obligatory upon everyone to take it? And does your personal position differ maybe with the official position that it is obligatory to take it? Or this is a question that people are asking, why don't we just mandate and say it's haram to not take it and so on for the greater good and the benefit of it?
Okay, yeah. Well, so just to cite the most important contemporary fatwa with regard to forcing people to take medicine, it's the fatwa of the International Islamic Fiqh Academy, IIFA. That's the largest fiqh body in the Muslim world, and they said that there are 4 cases where treatment is obligatory, 2 of them where the consent of the patient is not required or it's not needed. And one of the 2 cases where the consent of the patient is not needed is, when it is mandated by the state or by the authorities because to curb the spread of contagious disease. And certainly people may frown at this because of the also intellectual milieu and the cultural milieu that we live in. But in a place like China, for instance, they forced people to take people who are sick with TB, tuberculosis, they forced them to take the medicine because you're spreading it. And in order for us to stop the spread, to curb the spread of the disease, we need to force people to take the medicine. So they would send people to their homes to give them the tablets and ensure that they have taken them. So yes, there is the International Islamic Fiqh Academy finds this to be permissible for the authorities to force people to take medicine to curb, for the public health, for the purpose of protecting the well-being of the society or public health concerns. The second one is in the case of emergent resuscitation. Someone is bleeding and he's not letting you basically stop the bleeding, then you could tie them down and stop the bleeding. And they do this in emergency rooms across the country. Like if the patient is out of control and the patient is bleeding, you can actually, and we do this to children all the time. Who is the child who will just sit there for you to give them a shot? So anyway, the idea here is there are certain cases where this could be permissible. So there are certain cases where this could be permissible. However, we wanted to stop short of saying that it's obligatory for different reasons. One of the reasons why is basically to not spend of the asset that religion has, or expend of the asset that religion has in the hearts of people for what seems to be like it's, people have this paranoia about, scholars and the religious institution and organized religion and conspiracy between the authorities and organized religion and so on. The scholars being puppets or tools in the hands of authorities, which is just like a sick notion. Some of the scholars may be, but it's just a sick notion to think this way of the scholars in general. But at any rate, we just did not want to hurt the place of religion by mandating it. But at the same time, if a scholar believes that the harm clearly the benefit of the vaccine clearly outweighs the harm, and the harm is significant enough to warrant the obligation of the vaccine, that scholar is completely entitled to issuing a fatwa with this proposition, or like, to this effect.
Yes. Thank you so much. Our time is up. I think, alhamdulillah, we covered all the main points. As always, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. I really enjoy and benefit these discussions with you. And I hope you join us again and honor us with your presence again on future topics. I'm sure we'll be inviting you again very soon. To summarize, Sheikhna, and to end, because we did speak about a lot of topics, some of them academic, maybe a little difficult to understand for some of the people. In one short concluding, goodbye remark, should people take the vaccine? Is it allowed? And should they be worried about any sin or anything like that in taking it?
No, I don't think that there is sin in taking it. I think it is completely allowed. I would say it is highly recommended, and I would not blame the scholars who say it's obligatory to protect the health of people. And if scholars in any Muslim country consider this to be obligatory, I would not at all think bad of them. I would think that they're trying to protect the public health of the community.
Jazakallah khairan. So in short, summarize the entire lecture, one sentence. For those of you who don't want to listen to or coming in late at the recording and it's too maybe academic, in summary, no problem in taking the vaccine, inshallah, don't worry. And alhamdulillah, qualified scholars and councils have done their due diligence and researched it well in joint partnership with the medical community, and it's fine, inshallah, take it. Thank you so much, Shana, for being with us. I hope you have a very good rest of your night, and I hope to see you again soon, inshallah. السلام عليكم. هذا وصلى الله وسلم على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. والسلام عليكم.